Well, hello, BookTube. Merry Christmas. I'm so happy to be here with you guys today. I have, Father Christmas himself right here with me. It is Mark from Book Time with Elvis.
Hey everyone.
So, today we wanted to talk a little bit about Dead Mountain, the untold true story of the Dyatlov Pass incident by Donnie Ecker. Is that how you pronounce his name, Mark? I think Ecker.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Um, And this was the December read for the Black Hearts Book Club. I guess just start off with Mark before reading this book, because you actually read it previously. You read it as a reread with the book club. But
hmm
before you read the book, did you know a whole lot about the Dyatlov incident?
Well, actually, I came to the book the first time around. I think it was maybe 3 years ago. I can't remember exactly. Um, Due to a lesson I had with one of my students here, and he was reading a book about it, and he seemed to think that I should know about it, and I'd never heard of it before. Well, maybe it was one of those things that I might have it was in the recesses of my mind that there was some weird thing that there was always the weird stuff happening in Russia, wasn't there? There was that the beginning of the 20th century, that weird explosion, wasn't there, and all this stuff that you kind of know about, but you don't know about. So it didn't ring any bells with me, and I can't remember if he was reading a Czech version of this specific book, because there's another one very similar in title in English as well. Or maybe he was even reading a Czech author's book. But anyway, it got me interested in it. So I started looking around, see what I could find in English about it. And I picked up this book and I started reading it. I said to my mum, this is really good, because she likes weird stuff like that. So she started to read it as well. We read it pretty much together about 3 years ago. And then, you said you'd penciled me in to be the co-host for this. And I was like, well, I want to be your co-host. I've read it. And I can't, I'm not going to say that I read it in great detail all the way through. I had to go, I skipped a bit. I moved back and forth. I had to reacquaint myself, especially with his hypothesis and his theory behind what happened. But it's fascinating. And what about you? Had you heard about it before you read the book, or?
Yes. You know, I guess I may be known for being interested in weird, mysterious things, conspiracy theories, that sort of thing. So,
Is there a Kennedy link to the Yellow Class?
haven't found one yet. I'm still looking though. But so this has been on my radar before, and I knew some of the, I guess, more kind of mysterious and sort of gruesome details of the case, but I didn't know a whole lot about the group. Of course, I think most people have, if they've heard of it, they've seen some pictures of the group, and it's a really tragic incident. And of course, I think most people default to, oh, well, it was the Soviet Union in 1959, and so there must be some sort of conspiracy, there must be some sort of cover up, just simply due to that fact. And I must say, I love a good conspiracy, but I really think the way the Soviet Union handled this situation, it kind of impressed me a good bit, because they could have destroyed all of the documents related to this investigation. I mean, based on the timeline and that sort of thing, they could have been destroyed. And I'm just so used to, like with the Kennedy assassination, that has happened. Evidence has been destroyed. And so I guess I was impressed by the fact that records have been released related to this case, and they actually preserved them. The author of this book actually saw the tent from the Dyatlov Pass incident. So I guess, that in my mind kind of dispelled any sort of, Soviet conspiracy related to this case.
I think it's interesting you bring that up, actually. The fact of the evidence and existence and all this kind of stuff, the things they kept, because, and you bring up Kennedy stuff being destroyed. I think that's very telling, because I think our own governments were more inclined to destroy and bury and hide stuff. Now, I think in these totalitarian regimes, it was easy to keep it out of the public vision, but they didn't destroy a whole lot of stuff. I mean, this is how we obviously know a lot of what went on, even with the Nazis. Only at the end, when they know things are going wrong, they start to burn everything. But they kept
Right.
tons of records about everything. This is why we were able to put them all on trial. Well, a lot of them on trial, and also I think with the Russians too. The Soviet Union was so bureaucratic that the paper trails were just for everything. They just didn't destroy it, and if they tried to destroy it near the end, I think they only really went for stuff that would implicate people who could possibly be in power now and stuff like this, to kind of cover their tracks. And that happened all across, it happened here as well, for sure, that people involved in the secret police, knowing their next move and stuff, destroyed papers relevant to protecting their own, I can't say that word, protecting their own backs and stuff when they, their futures, basically, shoring it up. So I'm not super surprised at the amount of evidence, and I would say that it doesn't surprise me that we can see the Soviet archives being full of stuff, and our own, like in the US or Britain, having files that have been mysteriously damaged or lost or missing. So
Yeah. One of the things, and I guess for those people who are unfamiliar with the case, I guess we should start by explaining what this is. So the Dyatlov Pass is named after a leader of a hiking group. And this hiking group was originally made up of 10 hikers. They were mostly university students at I forget the name of the university, but it was in the Ural Mountains.
yeah,
Ural Polytechnic Institute or something
that's
like
right.
that.
Yeah.
And essentially, this group was seeking a grade 3 hiking certification. So I imagine that sort of hiking certification would let them lead other hiking groups. And so what ends up happening is one of the group members turns back because he has quite a difficult time with I think it's arthritis, but he has some pain. He doesn't think he's going to be able to continue the hike, so he turns back. The 9 continue on, and they never return, and their bodies and their tent is found in quite a state that you would not expect to find experienced hikers. So the tent is intact, food is laid out, shoes are laid out, the bodies are found, most of them not adequately clothed, missing shoes and socks, and their remains are found kind of spread out. So they were not all together. And, what I guess strikes most people about the case is that the big question is, why did they leave their tent? Because they had every means of survival in that tent. They had a stove, they had adequate clothing, they had all of the things that you would need to survive this expedition, and yet they literally cut themselves out of the tent. And that was another, I guess, mystery, is the cuts in the tent, because I think initially some people thought that an intruder, an attacker or something had cut the tent and attacked these people, because some of them did have very traumatic injuries and the like. So
It was, very traumatic, wasn't there? There was like what was it? Cracked skull, I think, on some of them. There was missing eyes, I think, as well as someone was even missing their tongue.
Yes.
So sorry if I see Sean in the comments is sitting down to his Christmas dinner, so apologies.
This is probably not a great conversation for that, Sean. We apologize.
Yeah. Which is all quite weird. And the bodies, of course, they weren't found together. They were scattered in different places. And why some had this trauma and others didn't, it is very, it's very interesting. I mean, it's very mysterious. It is. Yeah, it is intriguing. What the heck? What on earth went on?
Yeah. And I think some things that I learned, because the details that I had known that had really piqued my interest, I guess, about the case previously, although I hadn't really looked into it that much, were the missing eyes and the missing tongue. Because the one young lady who was missing a tongue, it wasn't like it was cut out. It wasn't like, they could really determine what happened to it. And so you're really wondering what sort of creature or what sort of phenomena, what sort of event would cause such a traumatic death. But there were a few details in this book that I did not know. The two young men who were found near the cedar tree. So there were two men found underneath a cedar tree, and evidence shows they were actually able to build a fire because they had sewn matches into their clothing. And so we see the remnants of the fire. We also see where one of the pair had climbed up the cedar tree and, had felled some branches, and in all likelihood, he probably fell from the tree as well because he had some traumatic injuries there too. But with those bodies, some of their clothing was charred. Some of the clothing was cut. One of the young men, I believe, part of his hand was burned. And, so to me, and I think the author makes a compelling case for this as well, those sorts of things are indicative of someone with hypothermia. You were so cold and you were so close to that heat that you maybe succumb to unconsciousness because you're heated too quickly, and then you're too close to the fire, so now you're literally being burned in your sleep. And then I guess
because there's that whole weird thing with hypothermia. I forget what they call it. It's like inverse heating. It like people take off their clothes rather
yes,
than put on more layers. Yeah, it's fascinating.
yes, and I think a lot of people may have just said, "Oh, well, obviously it's clearly hypothermia," which I think nobody would argue that the people did not die of hypothermia. But I think the question is, why would they leave their clothing? So they went out without adequate clothing. I don't think anybody's going to make the argument that um, towards the end, the taking off of the clothing, wasn't part of the hypothermia. I think that's pretty well known now that
Yeah.
is a phenomenon, which sounds crazy, but that does happen. They start to remove the clothing because they get the sensation of being very, very hot. So, I guess the big question is what would make them leave the tent? And before reading this book, what was your theory on that? Or did you have a theory?
Well, I didn't know, as I say, a huge amount about it before I read it, other than just having this discussion with this student of mine. I was ready to believe anything, really. I mean, I think my biggest thought was that it was some kind of military mistake. Was what I thought it would be. I thought it could have been just some, because we're talking, what are we talking? 59, was it?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, it's not too long after like all these nuclear tests and all this kind. Maybe they were testing something, went off, and it's something they, as I said, would be quite happy to cover up in terms of like what the population knows. Doesn't affect, of course, the records that they would keep hidden, because of course they would never have expected them to be unsealed or visible for everybody. But I think, I assumed very much it was some kind of top secret military exercise that these people ended up getting caught up in, and led to these bizarre deaths. I've actually just pulled the list up in front of me, and it is interesting that, like, officially, of the people involved, 2, 4, 6 of them are official cause of death as hypothermia, with 2 of them Well, one of them died, cause of death, internal bleeding from severe chest trauma. Another one also severe chest trauma and fatal skull injury. So it looks like those may have been the causes of death. And if that is, did they have hypothermia when they suffered those other injuries? You see, that would also make a difference on whether something, really untoward was going on. I think the really strange thing is the last man, Zolotaryov. He was the oldest one, and he was quite a bit older. He was like 38
Mhm.
when this happened, and he must have been quite experienced. So that is also a bit weird. And he dies, or his cause of death is severe chest trauma, not necessarily hypothermia. So there's all sorts of weird things. I really don't know, but yeah, sorry for a really long rambling answer. I would have put the blame on some kind of messed up military exercise. And you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree
Yeah, the
with you, Mark.
CIA did it, or
The um, so actually, I didn't really think it was anything like sinister by, military, like, because I think there is the conspiracy that they saw some testing and that, they were killed, that they were literally murdered by military forces or something trying to cover it up. And I never thought that, but I did, like you, kind of hem in on the fact that there was trauma here. I
yeah,
mean, with some of the victims. And to me, I just thought maybe there was some sort of explosion, be it some sort of, astronomical phenomena or, military exercise, something that happened that caused that sort of trauma. And what that was, that was kind of beyond me to know. But um, I didn't adhere to the original theory that maybe it was some of the tribes in the area, the Mansi tribes. There really was no indication of that. I think that the tribes in that area were relatively peaceful, and they tended to, it seemed to me, help those hikers that were in that area, because you have to think this is a very remote area, so it's not like they're going to be inundated with people. So I
Mhm.
feel like when you're in those sorts of circumstances where you're in very remote areas and you don't have access to a lot of resources, more often than not people tend to help each other in those circumstances. And every indication was that the Mansi tribe did that, not to mention the fact that this mountain got its name from the Mansi tribe, and they called it Dead Mountain because nothing really lived on it. There wasn't really anything that grew on it. There didn't seem to be a lot of animal activity, which I think also kind of speaks to the fact that it's not very likely that it was some sort of mysterious animal attack. Um, and even if it was, I'm not a super experienced camper, but I wouldn't leave the safety of a tent where I have the ability to make fire and that sort of thing to go out into the animal's domain. Like if I was scared of an animal, I don't think I would flee the tent. So
But that's the
for
thing. If there weren't many animals around because
right,
it's dead
yeah,
mountain,
yeah,
and you have to, I mean, nature is usually a good indicator like that. Animals are a good thing to watch. So if animals are not hanging around there, there's a good reason for it, right? I mean, we can't really say, given how far away it was from civilization, you can't lay the blame at industrial expansion or something like that as causing lack of flora and fauna. And I think perhaps that there is a very good reason, and maybe what the author alludes to later is that reason. They'd know about it and not and know to stay away from it. But what do you think about a theory that maybe just one of them went mad and like attacked the others, and because it could result in all of their deaths, because of course one person goes mad, ends up maybe one of the ones with the chest trauma. He's attacked, or say he attacks two of them, they're the ones who die of severe chest trauma. Someone whacks him over the head, causes a fatal skull injury. They run off scared, and they die of hypothermia. So,
well, one of the things that really struck me about this book was the camaraderie between the hikers. And this is a mixed group of hikers, so you do have female hikers, and they all seem to be extremely close and very respectful of each other. And that's one thing that really struck me, and I think made the ending of this book so hard to read, because I really kind of got attached to these hikers through the pictures. I mean, I knew they had pictures. Obviously, I think that the cover is one of the most infamous pictures of the hikers, and you kind of see them going off into the abyss, and of course we know that they will not return, so it's very ominous. But I think a lot of the photographs give us a peek into their personalities, and I was just blown away by how much documentation there was. But apparently, I guess that was kind of part of this grade 3 hiking certification that they were trying to get, is they kind of had to document this trek. And so I think through that, and also through the diary entries, because one of the hikers keeps a pretty neat little diary that gives us a peek into it as well. I don't really think that, unless, and here's the one, I guess, wild card, and you mentioned him earlier. It's the last minute hiker who was kind of included in this, the 38, I think he was 38 years old. Yeah. And he was a World War II veteran. And he had tattoos on his body, which they talked a little bit about. Yeah, I mean, never say never. I mean, I feel like the theory that this author tries to prove does appear to be very likely, but I don't think we can say with any certainty that this is exactly what happened. So I wouldn't count it out. I wouldn't count that out, Mark. You do bring up a good point there.
Yeah. I mean, people can snap. I mean, and it's scary. In a confined place, people would panic. I mean, something really drastic must have happened to force them, one, to, as you say, cut open that tent from the inside as well. That's it. They can tell that it was cut from the inside out. And I was just checking, the temperature. I mean, it puts it in perspective. How cold is it there now?
It's 17 degrees here, so it's at least 30 or 40 degrees colder with the Dyatlov hikers. Is that right?
It was between -25 to -30 Celsius, or -13 to -22 Fahrenheit. And, and there was a storm raging as well, because you can see the tent, the pictures from the tent. It's kind of covered. I mean, I think some people did say it was could have been some form of avalanche or something, but I think even when you look at the picture, it looks just like a snowstorm, really there. But to force you out in those conditions, badly dressed, as I say, some of them were only in socks or slippers, or even one of them had only one shoe on. Their clothes were found to be snipped or ripped. That's bizarre. That is the weird thing. Having these cuts and rips on their clothes is a very bizarre thing. So yeah, I mean, whatever it is, it must have been something severely traumatic or it's a desperate act. That's what it is. It's a desperate act of escape. So and I don't know. Obviously, if I knew what it was, I would be great, wouldn't I? I could tell you who killed Kennedy as well. I'd know all this stuff. But it is. Yeah, I don't know. I just don't think they'll ever really know for sure. I mean, unless they. Well, Sean reckons it could be a Yeti. Yeah, well, maybe. But unless they reconstruct it, it's the only thing I can think of. But you wouldn't find many volunteers to go and reconstruct. And I don't know if people had been there since. Have people? I mean, I don't think he mentions in the book whether people I can imagine the Soviets probably like sealed it off as a place to go, but
Well,
now, you know.
and that was one of the things that also kind of, I guess, made me respect how they handled the situation,
Mhm.
in some ways, because after this they did close that area to hiking groups, so like
Mhm.
they wouldn't grant um, these, university hiking groups, a permit or whatever to go through that area. Now, if you did it on your own, that was kind of up to you, but I will say the rescue efforts in this book were substantial. I mean, it was, they did everything they could to try to find the hikers initially, and then when they realized there was no hope, to try to recover all of the bodies. Now, I understand they did try to keep it kind of low key. They didn't want a huge crowd at the funerals and that sort of thing. And I think, a lot of people look at that and they're like, well, see, there's a conspiracy. But, you know, I don't know. I think that was maybe an attempt to prevent that sort of speculation that it was something, the government was involved in. And of course, it had the opposite effect. I think it increased the speculation, the fact that they were trying to kind of control the publicity around it, or the attention to it.
I think the
Um,
problem. Sorry,
no, go ahead.
I think one of the big problems with it, and it's the same with anything like this, of this ilk, these conspiracies. One, we love them, of course we do.
We do.
So much more. All the while it exists, it's much more fun than if we know the boring reality, which could just be, you know, whatever it is. Because as much as I really love the book and I thought he was a great writer, there was still an element for me, a little bit of disappointment in the theory, because I wanted it to be something maybe more. I don't know, but we'll come to that, I'm sure. But what I wanted to say was that one of the big problems with all these conspiracy things is how, at the time, especially when they happen, they don't have the mass media or the big communications that we have now, where they could tweet from the scene, or they can, send stuff immediately. People can come forward immediately. And I think these legends build up over time, right? And I remember they were talking about, like, I think even he talks to people who talk to people. This is it. He talks to people who talk to people who remembered them, or people who remembered the event, but nothing was said in the original investigation in 1959. They didn't feel comfortable talking about it because, I guess, of the system. So some other people start to talk about their reminiscences of the event after the fall of communism in early 1990s, which, of course, by this point, 30, 40 years have passed. People are just misremembering, or they're not, you know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
somebody remembers somebody else's opinion as a fact, and these things just explode like that. So I do think quite often it is a case of just having to sift through a load of, evidential seaweed, as it were, to get to anything worth salvaging.
Yeah,
So
and Katrina Brown, she asked, did Russia come out recently and say it was just an avalanche? I actually think they did at one point, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, come out and say that they thought maybe it was an avalanche.
it
And
was
the
actually
author,
2 years ago.
the author talks about that, and I tend to agree with him. Okay, let's say they did hear rumblings or thought it was an avalanche. Again, based on where their tent was and the angle of the tent, I think experienced hikers would know that an avalanche at that particular area was unlikely. And I don't know that they're going to go out in sock feet. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but there's, and if they heard a rumbling, what was it? Because it wasn't an avalanche. The tent was found intact. And the searchers, when they came to the tent was kind of like damaged once they started messing with it and going inside of it. But they commented on how everything was intact. There were cups with, liquid in them, laid out. The, shoes were nice and lined up, so the avalanche did not happen. So I just find it hard to believe that that was the cause of this. And I think that that's the convenient explanation.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. I've got, this article pulled up in front of me, and they are talking about the avalanche theory put forward by the deputy, I guess, governor or whatever of the Urals district back in 2020, saying, yeah, it was just an avalanche. And their argument was that because they were so experienced, that's what caused their death. If they had been less experienced, they probably would have survived because they would have stayed in the tent. And so his argument was that the fact that they were so experienced doomed them, because the more experienced you are in this skiing and hiking or whatever in mountain areas, the more you fear avalanches because you know what they can do. So his argument was like, had they been less experienced, they probably would have like hunkered down in the tent, and then they would have just dug themselves out afterwards, right? Bit weird, I would say.
Yeah,
And
because again, I go back to if they were that experienced, and I think that's kind of the point I guess this author makes, looking at where they set up the tent and kind of the angle and the things, like you would think being that experienced, they would know, that it's unlikely. And they would also be well versed in hypothermia and the effects of that. I mean, again, the no shoes thing just really, that just gets to me. It had to be something very unusual.
well, I mean, the evidence against it being an avalanche is, again, just the patterns of snow. The bodies are found with just a thin layer of snowfall on it, not like, they've been swept up in anything like that. There were over 100 expeditions actually in that region since this original episode occurred, and not a single one of them ever reported on any conditions that remotely resembled any kind of avalanche. The area is not actually even known particularly for avalanches, which is also very strange. And had an avalanche occurred, some guy worked it out, that it would have swept past the area where the tent was, because of just, I guess they do some geometric or whatever analysis. And the fact that the tent had collapsed from the side and not in a horizontal direction, apparently also is another indication, as it wasn't an avalanche. And also the fact that they were so experienced, which goes against the other guys' thing, is that those, especially the older guy from Zoltarov and Dyatlov himself, would never have put camp in the path of a potential avalanche. So that also is something. And also just the footprints as well, leading away from the scene. None of them would be consistent with the circumstances surrounding such a thing. So, but it's always like this. This is the problem, isn't it, Carrie? You always have someone can say this, and you can find 10 facts as to why it isn't like that. And then you can also find 10 facts to support why it could be like that. This is why these things are so maddening. I mean, I love them, I really do. But I also find them tantalizing and maddening that we'll never really know.
Yeah. That's true. And I mean, not to beat a dead horse here, but with the avalanche thing and them being so experienced, you would think that they would leave together, that they would at least, let's say, they do leave without their shoes or whatever. They leave. You would think they would leave together, not in such a state of pure panic and disarray. I mean, the scene is literally chaos. So I think even your theory about, maybe just one of them went mad, I think that would better explain the evidence here than an avalanche. I just don't see the avalanche explanation, being viable at all.
The weird thing, though, I mean, I'm on Wikipedia now as well. I've got it all pulled up. I'm, kind of organized. But the weird thing is, you see, I don't know how much you can trust this, and this is not just some snotty kid who's just written some information in there. And I can't remember this from the book. I might have glossed over it. But it said the footprint patterns that lead away from the tent are inconsistent with one person, let alone 9 people running in panic for their lives, because of an avalanche. And apparently all the footprints that led away from the tent were consistent with individuals who were walking at a normal pace. So to me, that makes it even more bizarre then. If they had cut themselves out of a tent to then walk away at a normal pace, does this ring a bell to you, or should I discard this?
Let me throw this out there, because okay, and if you haven't read the book and you don't want to know what this author's theory is, you can turn off now, because I'm going to go into kind of what he postulates here. He says that, you know, this is all caused by infrasound, and that this infrasound is caused by these twin tornadoes on either side of this dead mountain, that essentially the terrain and looking at the topographical maps and all of this, that, you know, scientists at NOAA, this is what they have put out as being a likely natural phenomena that would have caused essentially a state of mania. I mean, it would have caused intense pain, very similar, I guess, to like a migraine headache. It would have caused paranoia, confusion, and that the effects of that may not have lasted very long. So, you know, it may have worn off. And then when we see that, you know, some of the victims were able to build a fire, obviously at that point, the effects of the infrasound have diminished, but that may have caused them to leave. Now, I'm just thinking of myself, because I suffer from migraines, and I know that if I have a migraine headache, just walking slowly hurts. I mean, it hurt, just the jostling, that is painful. So if the effects of this infrasound are as severe as, and I know, I guess it can affect people in different ways. Some people are a little bit more sensitive to it than others. But maybe they are definitely in a state of confusion, in panic, in pain. They can almost feel the reverberations of the sound and these tornadoes, you know, under the tent. They can feel it in their bodies. I don't think you're going to be able to run in that state. So maybe they were going in a very slow manner, even though it was in a state of confusion. So, you know, that might be explained. And he doesn't really go into, he goes into a little bit of an explanation as to what the effects of the infrasound would look like, but not in a lot of great detail. So it's kind of hard to say. And again, I think it's very dependent on people, because they even have regions of the United States where this is a problem because of factories and certain things, certain types of noise generate this low frequency that some people, you know, they have nausea, or they have just kind of a sense of being unwell, but it's not necessarily, you know, this sort of, you know, impact like we see here.
I've had similar effects brought on bizarrely in nightclubs. You know, I have been affected by no joke, and this is why I actually found it a very interesting hypothesis, albeit somewhat disappointing. I thought the book was so well written. He gave such great background information. I don't know why it just kind of a little bit disappointed me that it could be something as almost simple as this, really, which I could grasp. But I have felt it. I have been in like small discotheque or nightclub with such, I don't know, loud or whatever it was. All I can say to you is the vibrations from the music, the speakers, this, I don't know, this dance music, you know, the thumping and all this stuff caused me to feel, and I'm not, nothing to do with alcohol, I promise you, to feel nauseous. Yeah, like I could you know, what's the word? Well, vomit, I suppose. Sorry if it's still eating you. But,
sorry, Sean.
I felt really rough, and I could never go back to this place because it was just too small, and the sound, I don't know what it was, just affected me. I don't know. I know a friend of mine complained about his hearing after, but he didn't have the feeling of sickness. So I could very well imagine how sound can um, cause you to feel physically unwell. So that it wasn't a big leap for me because I feel I've experienced that. Not obviously infrasound or to some big extent. I didn't like run out of the disco or the nightclub with no clothes on and like run through the streets and jump in the river and you know not 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 on that occasion anyway. But but
Well,
yeah, it's
that's pretty crazy. My question, I guess, is, Mark, though, since there have been other hikers that have hiked this same route, have we had any reports of similar incidents? To me, and Sean brought up, he said it would be interesting to look at Soviet air movement at the time, if they were testing any sort of aircraft in the area. And here's my thought on that. I think, not to be, and this might sound like a cop out, but it could be several different factors, playing into this, because who's to say that it wasn't some sort of air movement or military testing that then prompted this infrasound or prompted
yeah,
these, twin tornadoes on this mountain, by flying too close to it.
it's vortex.
Because, yeah, to say that it was just this natural phenomena on this mountain, I'm not saying it's impossible for that to happen only once, but you know, it just is kind of suspicious, I guess, that we've never heard of this happening ever again
Yeah,
to any of
yeah.
the other hikers or any similar, and maybe not to that extent, like you said, you couldn't go back into that club anymore. And maybe, if other hikers reported feeling odd or having a sense of unwellness, or I think that would give this theory a lot more credence. um but I
But it
do
could
like
be.
what the author I do like what the author came up with. I think there's some scientific backing to it. I don't think he has completely solved it, but I think it does answer some questions.
I think it does fit in why animals wouldn't be there because they're super
Yes.
sensitive when it comes to hearing and this kind of stuff. And I think they would sense something like that. It's not a good place to be and wouldn't be there. So that's definitely a plus, I think, for his theory. Um, I mean, it's not a million. I agree with you. I could see it being the result of some kind of test. I mean, we know when they do like nuclear tests that you can have like what do they call it, like nuclear winds, is it, and this kind of like it can have some microclimatic effect in the area. And it's not, I mean, this isn't, I don't even know whether or not it's happened. I'm thinking Concorde is the first supersonic jet liner, and it's released in 68, I think, isn't it, 67, 68, something like that. This is 59. I don't know when the first military supersonic capabilities came about, but you could imagine, because they're not allowed to go supersonic over land and things like that. So maybe some kind of supersonic boom testing, something like this, creates a condition where it gets, this infrasound, the frequencies or whatever, gets stuck in the mountain passes and bounce off things and the vortex, or you know what I mean, and just
Yeah.
creates this cacophony that drives these people temporarily insane. Yeah, I think the fact that I've never heard of it anywhere else in the world, and I've only ever heard of it in this incidents put forward by the author, does make me skeptical. But as much as I wanted it to be some kind of KGB conspiracy or aliens or whatever, the theory is just as good or better than the other ones. So, yeah, it's still an open book, I think, really, as to what actually happened. But, this explanation is a feasible one. So,
And then actually Jim said
there you
the
go.
first
So,
supersonic jet was 1946. Okay.
well, there you go.
So
So,
Yeah, and I mean, if the Soviets were experimenting with sound in a combat situation, that it could be. It just could be
Well, there is a
an
martial art,
unhappy.
and I can't remember the name of it, but there's I forget if it's China or Japan, maybe Korea actually, but there are people who specialize in using sound and using their voice to disarm combatants or to disarm people, right? So there is definitely something that we cannot deal with on certain frequency levels or something like that. I've seen it where like the master of this, you can probably YouTube it, where he just literally just shouts, but shouts in such a way at this person that they drop the knife, or you know what I mean. It
Yeah.
has some impact on them. So yeah, I think the idea that sound can cause this kind of weird reaction, it's not beyond the realms of possibility. So
Now, I did because the book, just for those of you that haven't read it, if you're interested in reading it, it basically follows three timelines. So we have the timeline of the hikers, where you're getting, the pictures and the diary entries, and then you have the timeline of the rescue teams, looking for the hikers, and then you have 2012, which is when the author actually goes into Russia to try to investigate. And, I have to give this author a good bit of respect, because he actually does part of the hike. I mean, he goes to that area and he really wants to follow in their footsteps, and look at this from their perspective. And the end of the book, he basically kind of splices together the facts with his theory
mhm.
and puts together an account of what may have happened. And I think that was very difficult to read, because the one hiker who was found alone, they think actually he may have survived longer than the other hikers. And just thinking about that, thinking about this lone hiker who is, from the um, patterns of movement, it looks like
Mm,
he was going back and forth between the different groups of hikers. He went to the two men who were under the cedar tree, and, unfortunately, he realizes they've already succumbed to hypothermia. He cuts some of their clothing off, which would explain some of the cuts in the clothing. He goes back to, I think it was the three who had suffered the traumatic injuries at a ravine. So they think that these three may have taken a tumble down a ravine, which caused the, head injuries and the chest injuries, which, at the time, investigators said were consistent with a car crash. Essentially, they
mhm,
were so
mhm.
severe.
Yeah.
But I think he goes back there, and we can see that the bits of clothing that were cut off of the other hikers are then wrapped around the feet of some of the other hikers in an attempt to keep them warm. A lot of the hikers were found wearing clothes belonging to the others. So, in my mind, I'm just imagining this scenario, and I don't cry often, but it almost made me cry, because I'm just thinking about this poor guy. He is all alone in one of the most desolate places I could ever imagine. And he realizes that he's going to die, and he is trying, you know, desperately to do what he can to help his friends. And it just broke my heart. It just really did. I mean, that was really hard to read. And I think, it's easy to get wrapped up in the gory
Mhm.
details, and be fascinated by it, which I clearly am fascinated by, what happened to these hikers. But I didn't lose sight of the fact that these were a group of young people who
Yeah.
had, they had the world at their fingertips. I mean, at this time, it it looked like a time in the Soviet Union where things, may improve. They didn't know, but they thought, Stalin's dead, so things might, start to improve here. And it seemed like these young people really had um, a zest for life and a zeal for, adventure and, camaraderie. And they just seemed like very nice young people. And, I guess I'm fascinated by people who do really hard, extraordinary things because I can't imagine doing this for fun.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess at the time you got to kind of see it from their perspective too. They're college students in the Soviet Union, and even if you have a hope that your future will be better, you're still essentially surrounded by spies, and you really have to watch what you say. You have to watch what you do, and when you go on these hikes into the wilderness, you don't really have to worry about that. You are apart from all of that. And they had their little satire newspaper that they wrote in their
Mm-hmm.
diary where they kind of poked fun at certain things in certain parts of the Soviet Union. So it's kind of interesting to get a little insight into that and kind of understand, I guess, why they would want to do something like this.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. For sure. I think it's interesting as well that the diaries of the expedition they're all in the public domain in Russia now.
Yeah.
See, we don't speak Russian, sadly, so we won't
work
really.
on that, Mark.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not doing much this
In
weekend,
your
so.
free time, just 48 hours, get that done for us.
But I think that's a really important point. When we read all these things, whether it's this one or when we read when we read the five about the five women killed supposedly killed by Jack the Ripper, it's easy to lose sight of the fact of the humanity and the fact that these were living, breathing people like us and like people we know. And and when you, as you say, when you talk about him and his last moments and things, it must have been so just terrifying and lonely and horrible and dark and sad. And certainly it is heartbreaking. And I think it's very important that you bring that up, really, because it is quite easy to lose sight because it's just words on the page, really. And it's a story, but this is a true story, a real story of a real person or real people. And it's important to remember that, I think.
Before we came on, I was trying to find the spot where it talked about this, and I couldn't find it. I didn't mark it, unfortunately. But one of the female hikers, I was kind of struck by how tough she was because on a previous hike she had been shot accidentally. She'd been shot accidentally in the leg, and I mean, basically, she just kind of like
Shrugged it
soldiered
off.
on and finished the hike, and then continued with this hobby. And I'm just like, wow, that's a whole different breed of people there.
Well, yeah, I mean, this generation, they would have grown up. They were born during the terror of Stalin's 30s, and then famine and deprivations of war. And I suppose getting shot in the leg during a routine hike is probably just a walk in the
Another
park.
day, and
Yeah,
yeah.
another day in the USSR. So.
Well, and to put things in perspective too, when they brought out the tangerine, for the one guy's birthday, and he shared it with all of them. It was just, really sweet. It really makes you kind of appreciate things, just thinking about that was a big deal for them. I mean, that was a treat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it wasn't that much. It wasn't that much better, even in the UK. I think I don't know when bananas came off rationing, but I want to say it was probably into the 1950s, the early 1950s. So if you were the same age as these Dyatlov Pass kids, and you could easily have been, 16, 17, 18 years old before you got your first banana, because it was still the hangover from the war. And I think food rationing or some forms of rationing didn't end until 1955 in the UK as well. So it wasn't all like I know in America it was much different. You guys could just feed yourselves and have everything
Yeah.
and whatever. But I think it did take Europe quite a long way to recover, and obviously, some countries more than most. But yeah, because kids, I think today they couldn't imagine it. I think they're getting some idea now. With all these different crises that we're
Yeah.
undergoing, that some things may not be available in the shops, but for the longest time, if you if you want a mango in Chicago in February, it's pretty easy to get one, you know.
Yeah,
So
it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. I will say that after reading this book, I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole. Nothing too, nothing too crazy, but I did watch a couple of YouTube videos related to some Russian hiking incidents that were, I guess, kind of similar to the Dyatlov case in that they have sparked a lot of interest and mystery. One was, and I don't think I posted this one to the group. One was in 1974, and it was an all-female hiking group on Lennon Peak. And apparently, it was the worst storm in 25 years. And these women get to the summit, and the storm hits. And the most eerie part of it is that throughout the whole thing, there are radio transmissions. And so, I don't think there's any question about what killed them. I think they died of the elements. I mean, I think that's pretty clear, but it was just really creepy to hear the transmissions, particularly towards the end when you've got two people left and they realize and actually say we're going to die in about 15 minutes. It just so heartbreaking. There was one I came across though that was a bit of a question mark. And that was can't remember the name of it. The name of the hiking group was after the female leader they had. I want to say like Korovina, something like that. But that happened in 1993.
The leader of the hiking group.
Yes. It started with a K, and I think it was like Korovina, something like that. But in 1993, and I want to say it's in springtime or summertime, so it's not like a particularly dangerous time to go hiking. But this hiking group goes out. It's a mixture of, I think, some college students and this very experienced lady hiker. She's in her early 40s, but I think she's like a master hiker. And
Korovina, you're
yeah.
right.
And there's one survivor in this particular incident, but the people who died in this hiking group were completely fine. They had eaten breakfast at their campsite, and then one of the strongest hikers, a young man, he starts having a seizure and bleeding from the eyes. And the leader basically says, I'm going to stay with him. You guys, go on, get help, I'm assuming. And just they all start dropping with these very mysterious symptoms, and the eyes bleeding. Some of the hikers were reported as bashing their heads on rocks. One of the hikers tried biting another hiker. I mean, it sounded like a scene that was pure chaos. And these symptoms were very acute. I mean, they were not there, and then all of a sudden they were there. It wasn't like they started feeling sick and then, slowly these symptoms started appearing. It sounded as if, they were fine, and then all of a sudden they were not fine. And
makes the Donner Party look like a picnic, really, doesn't it?
I mean, really, yeah. It just, and I think that's one of the curious things about this case is that it's so unpredictable. I think, with some of the hiking groups, okay, a storm appears, okay, you kind of know where this is going. They're going to get stuck. Hypothermia is going to set in. You can kind of predict what's going to happen. But with this, it's like there's only a few things that it could be when you talk about, people starting to bleed from their orifices. And, had you heard of this? I know I posted a video about it. Had you ever heard of this? I'd never heard of it.
No, I hadn't. I kind of wish I still hadn't.
Yeah. Sorry, Mark.
The big lesson of all this is just don't go hiking in Russia.
Don't go hiking.
Don't go hiking in Russia.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I'm reading, yeah, the one girl who survived, yeah, and found covered in blood and all this, and they're saying it sounds like they would have died like this had they been exposed to some kind of chemical nerve gas agent.
Yes.
And they said that if it was to happen naturally, it could have been if they drank water contaminated by toxic waste or ate poisonous mushrooms by accident. But I don't know. I mean, I know what kind of Slavonic peoples are like. Yeah, Czechs, Poles, Russians. When it comes to mushrooms, they know everything there is to know about mushrooms. Now, you might get one or two people who make a mistake and eat it, but to have a whole group
Right.
accidentally eat the wrong type of mushroom, unless one person's just fed it to them all in a sauce or in a dish, they didn't notice it. But I don't know, it's weird. But the thing is,
Yeah.
yeah, I think the biggest lesson, just stay home, don't go anywhere,
Yeah.
just stay locked up.
But Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yeah, yeah,
But
that's
Mark
right.
and I are over here as the harbinger of doom on this Christmas day. But yeah, that case, yeah, the only thing I could think was a nerve agent. In the early 90s. I mean, I guess the timeline would fit with that sort of experimentation, and when that sort of thing is starting to come about. Um, the question I have is, how did the one lady survive? It just, as she was eating everything the group was eating.
Oh, I don't know, Carrie. When you've got a group of people, there's always someone who just won't eat what everybody else is eating. So
That's
maybe that's
true.
what saved her.
Maybe
Maybe
that
she
is what
was
saved her.
like, maybe she was, gluten intolerant, or maybe she couldn't, didn't
She
like
didn't like
mushrooms.
eating in the
Didn't like
morning.
mushrooms. She's
Yeah,
the only
because
one.
I guess the thing they had eaten that morning was breakfast, and maybe she didn't like to eat in the
That's
morning.
it.
Yeah, there's a lot of
That's
people
it.
like that. I guess this case lends itself more to a cover up, I think, than the Dyatlov case, because it hasn't really been talked about or publicized. The one survivor has been very reticent to talk about it at all. And the autopsies, from what I gathered, um, were really bizarre because they showed evidence that people died from a protein deficiency. I
Yeah,
mean,
protein deficiency and
which
heart
was
and
odd because they
lung
were,
damage.
yeah, because they were eating eggs and stuff for
Mm.
breakfast. So I'm like, how could you die of a protein deficiency?
And even if they ate mushrooms too,
Yeah, I don't. So that to me, really, really smacks of a cover up. I'm like, okay, so they're saying this very experienced hiker is
Yeah.
not gonna know how much food to take for this, and it didn't seem like that strenuous of a hike. I mean, from what I could gather, I don't know a lot of details about this case, so I could be completely wrong. This is based all on like a 12-minute YouTube video. But it didn't seem like that treacherous. I mean, Dyatlov Pass, sure, I that is a very treacherous sort of expedition. This one didn't seem as bad, and yet we have this result. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the big difference as to why there's a cover up and there wasn't one before is because by 1993 it's a democracy.
That's true.
So, I
Oh,
don't mean
yeah.
to like put my conspiracies out there, but it does seem weird. Like the records are much better in these authoritarian regimes, and as soon as you get democracies, oh no, we're covering it up now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
did you look up the Nazino Island thing that I sent?
I did not. I did not. So tell
That
us
will
about
give
that.
you a sleepless night. That
Oh,
is
okay.
that is probably for me the most horrific thing I've ever heard of in my life, and it's also in the USSR. So I don't know if
Oh,
anyone's watching.
no, hold on. I think I did look this up. I didn't, and I meant to like go circle back. I looked it up and just saw that there was cannibalism involved.
Oh
And
yeah,
then I don't know if I was eating or something, but I was like, I'll circle back to this, and I never went back, so I'll have to go back and really look at that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's I
Yeah.
think there is actually a short one of those is it simplified history cartoons on it, which is
Yeah.
kind of, but it's it is a horrific thing, horrific.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean there are just horrible things all over the place, but there seems to be a high proportion of them coming out there, really. So
It does. It really does. No, I guess I got on this theme of hikes and hikes gone wrong. Last month, I read The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. And I'm really interested in, even fiction books set in the mountains or during a camping trip or a hiking trip. And so once I read that book, then I started YouTubing like all of these like hiking disappearances and like national parks. And now that I've read Dead Mountain, now I'm looking at all of these, Russian hiking incidents. So, and I have that run planned on a trail next month. So here's hoping that it goes well. It's not in Russia, so I should be okay.
yeah, that's true. You don't live near any military bases or anything.
Yeah, actually there's
Well,
one
you
about
see.
40 minutes away, so I don't know. I gotta watch out for strange lights. Oh, I guess that's the one thing we haven't talked about, Mark, is this idea of
The orange
the
light,
strange light
spherical
phenomena.
orange. Yeah, but again, that is something that is reported after the event, isn't it? It wasn't mentioned in the original investigation, and it was people talking about it because it was another group, wasn't it? It was another group that was like, was it 50 miles away or something like that? And they could see these strange spherical, like orange lights in the sky, but they'd never mentioned it in the original thing. These things just cropped up, years later. So I don't know. It could. I'm a big believer in the conspiracy of conspiracies. That there is like a conspiracy to keep conspiracies going. Do you know what I mean? It's like
That is
it
true.
almost seems to be like a kind of group. Yeah,
There's and that I think the speculation, I guess, Mark, starts around that one photo, which is the
yeah.
last photo. But there's not too much to make of this photo, but what do you make of it, or what did you make of it?
Where's the photo from?
It's from the Dyatlov hiker's camera.
Oh, they actually took a photo of it as well.
Yes. Hmm.
What I make of it? Some lights in the sky.
Yeah. And I also thought this as well. I thought, well, one of the rescuers could have accidentally taken that photo. Because one thing the author brings up is one part of that light photo, it looks like the camera shutter, so it could have been just an accidental
Well,
photo.
I mean, think about.
It
I mean,
could be
how cold,
nothing.
think how cold it was. I mean, the cameras, are they going to work properly? I don't know. I mean, probably they
Yeah.
did work better than now because
Yeah.
now they would be so many intricate electrical pieces. They probably would break in -3. But
True.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult. It's
It
so difficult
is.
all the time to know what to think and when to think, and the only people who know are the people who can't tell us.
Yeah.
So, which is very frustrating, you know. So I don't know. I think probably the answer to this all lies within the Wizard of Oz. But
Oh, no, you did not, Mark.
oh no, I didn't. Oh yes, I did.
Oh my gosh. So
uh,
yeah, the Wizard of Oz, that's, related to the Kennedy assassination and also the Dyatlov Pass incident. You heard it here first from Mark.
all linked. It's all
So
linked.
next live show, Mark, I expect to see a cork board behind you with, images from the Wizard of Oz and, links, to everything.
They have a scarecrow to Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yes.
The orange lights in the sky over the Ural Mountains. Yeah, well,
Work
Actually,
on that.
though, to be fair, now I don't know if I'm thinking. I'm probably thinking of the film, The Wizard of Oz. But is it the witch or the fairy? The good witch? Doesn't she move in a ball of light?
She does. Yeah. Well, she didn't bring anything good to these hikers if that was the case. But I do think let's say the lights in the sky were real. Again, I think that just circles back to what we said previously, that it could be some sort of, phenomenon in the sky, be it a military testing or whatever, that could have caused, or triggered these, tornadic episodes and the infrasound and all of that. So it could be related. It could all be related, or it could be nothing. Because we do know that the rescuers, they I think drank the alcohol, the medicinal alcohol that was in the tent, and probably ate the chocolate and that sort of thing. So, the fact that they may have accidentally taken a picture is not out of the realm of possibility here. And that was another thing. The hikers were not drinkers, and they had nothing, toxicology reported, nothing in their system. Although I did find it interesting that they've kind of walked back the information about the radiation. Because initially it was reported that they had, a substantial amount of radiation in their clothing. And I think now with improved testing, they've realized that the amount of radiation was not anything unusual.
And I think even there's only one of them that is slightly above what they think is normal. So there's only the one person. I think Sean's right there. I think it's true. They're a gift for governments and these things, aren't they? Because you can just be like, well, yeah. You're never going to know. And while you're thinking about that, we're going to, we're going to sneak this under the table. So, yeah. But it was great. Thank you for hosting it, of course. And I look forward to the next one. And next month you are reading, or we are reading. I may not read it
because you've already read it, right?
Well, I've already read it, and it is the most disturbing book I've ever read, and I'm not sure I could actually bring myself. But I'm tempted to read the second book. Having said how disturbing it was, I am tempted to read the second book. I'm going to stay in the group because I want to know what everybody thinks of it. It's a great story. It is a great story. It's really good, but it's just, you'll see.
If it goes south, I'm going to blame you, Mark, because I did get this off of your recommendation, and you did. In all fairness, you did warn me that it was the most disturbing book, but I thought the group could handle it. I think they can.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will. I'm going to tell my mom not to read it, but
Okay. Yeah, protect mom. We don't want to scare her off.
The worst thing is she's probably the one in the whole group that actually is the least bothered by any of this stuff.
Well, really. Then she should read it then.
She's very she loves all this stuff. Yeah, gore and whatever, So
what is, I've already forgotten, Mark, but I have to look back at my post.
The Wolf and the Watchman.
The Wolf and the Watchman, yeah.
By Martin. Is it Martin? No, Niklaus Dag och Natt, or Natt och Dag. Nicholas Night and Day, or Day and Night. It's a trilogy, I think. Only the second one, up to the second one, has been published in English. They've existed for a while in other languages, been big sellers. It's kind of like if you take a Yo Nesbo or something like this and make it really, really disgusting and set it in the 18th century and come up with the most perverse and disturbing murder you can ever think of. It's it's good.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think maybe, is it February that you and I are set to read The Wicked Boy? It's The Wicked Boy, An Infamous Murder in Victorian London.
I don't remember if it's February, but if it is, that's fantastic because I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. So we've got I think we have some really good picks coming up. And then, of course, Sean and I are going to be doing The Maltese Falcon in March.
Great.
Planning to watch the film again as well, which I've watched I've watched the Bogart film a ton, but I've never read the book. And Sean's kind of a aficionado on it. He's read it many times, so I'm sure he'll have a lot to say about it. So yeah, we've got some really good books coming up. Is there anything else you wanted to chat about, Mark, before we sign off?
Um, yeah. Well, are you running off straight away, or have you got like 5 minutes at the end when we finish here?
I can have 5 minutes. That might give it a few more minutes to heat up a degree or two before I get out here and try to run.
Wonderful. But yeah, no, I've said all I want to say for public ears, as it were. But there's nothing nefarious there, people. You will find out in good time. It's just I want to ask
Yes.
Gary something after. So.
All right, guys. Well, thank you to everybody who popped in and out of the chat and for watching us. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have not read this book, I suggest picking it up. I think even if you listen to this conversation and we kind of, I guess technically spoiled the author's theory, I think it's still worth a read.
Yeah.
And thank you, Mark, for participating. I know when I saw the book and I thought it was interesting, I knew that you would like this. I figured, I'm like, this is a Mark book. And sure enough, you'd already read it. So, all right. Well, thanks for watching. And hopefully we'll see some folks in the book club. If you want to join the book club, just let me know and I'll add you to the chat. But we always have a good time. Literally, if it's just me and Mark in there, it's a good time, right, Mark?
That's right.
All right, guys. Have a happy Christmas.
Merry Christmas.